we have Sai Deepak, one of India's finest legal minds, senior advocate, now joining us to shed more light on it. Sai, thank you for doing this. Before I get into specific questions, what is your take on what you've seen so far?
As I've had the opportunity to share elsewhere, I believe that the central issue which concerns the conduct of examinations and other concerns of students, genuine students and not mischief mongers, will require some kind of redressal and also some kind of active engagement. In fact, to cut a long story short, I believe that perhaps the old school is the best school, which means that maybe there needs to be a press conference of sorts that is actually conducted by the government, as opposed to hoping that social media dissemination will do its job. Because I'm sure that even you have realized by now that it's not the Twitter or the X generation anymore, it's the Insta generation. Okay. And this is going to require active engagement on the part of the government in a way that seems more human, in a way that seems less robotic, in a way that feels more personal. I'm not going to suggest that the government must come down to meet the protesters at Jantar Mantar, because considering the nature of the behavior of some of these hooligans, one can't be sure of how they will react and what exactly are their intentions when government dignitaries or ministers turn up at the protest site. However, it should be possible for the government to engage with parents, students, educators at a slightly different level, and also separately deal with the issue of a larger organized anarchy that is sought to be created. And these two issues will have to be separated, is my view. Unfortunately, it just so happens that we haven't seen an outreach from the government which sets out the timeline clearly between what happened from the announcement of the first schedule of NEET and then its subsequent cancellation to the CBI investigation that was initiated once they realized that there was a problem, and how NEET was rescheduled to June 21st, and how that has been conducted. Now, these are aspects which the government will need to clarify. I'm not sure if breathless spokespersons debating on television channels like high school debaters is a substitute for a calm, sane engagement through a press conference.
But Sai, let's now talk about specifics. I'm picking up on the last point. Who do you engage with? Are there, specific people?
Is it not possible for the government to actually, let's say, organize a town hall of sorts, where they basically invite institutions, they invite doctors, they invite people of repute, they also invite parents and students? That should be possible. Why should that not be possible? See, if you want to identify someone who you can engage with, then you're actually going to identify some of these lumpen elements who are projecting themselves as the face of the so-called agitation. Okay? But if the government wants to reach out, it's certainly possible. As opposed to Jantar Mantar, are there no sites in Delhi where the government can actually have a large, let's say, town hall of sorts, where it actually takes questions from the stakeholders? Or the simplest thing would be a simple press conference where you actively take questions with respect to the ongoing issue. Why is that not happening? Have you seen a single press conference on the issue so far?
No, there are many questions that are, yet to be answered. And you're right, the government needs to be more forthright. This clandestine commentary in a way is not going to help. Let me ask you a larger question, Sai, and that is about, like you spoke of Insta generation. I've read some commentary there, and the mood seems to be completely anti-government. There is a lack of trust. It is more than lack of trust. But there is also a sense that one gets if you read the narrative there that they are, in a way, condoning violence. They think that you can do anything to reach your objective. Is that the right approach? Is there a difference, or what is the difference between democratic, legitimate protest and anarchy?
See, Pranesh, since 2014, this government has weathered multiple protests. It has seen multiple protests. And I would have expected the government to by now have an action plan of sorts to respond to a protest, or when it smells trouble brewing which could turn into a protest, it should have some kind of a response mechanism. Unfortunately, action in these issues seems to be ex post facto, because you have to separate two things. fact and perception. There's a decent chance that, factually speaking, the government may be right. But the perception that has been created over the last few years, especially with persistent leaks, is that it is not an issue that is serious enough for the government to take notice of. That's the impression that has actually been unfortunately created. Okay. And it doesn't help when people choose to look at these issues from their ivory towers as opposed to realizing that there is a large middle class and low middle class population that is actually being affected by this, because the rich people don't need competitive examinations to get into any institution.
True.
So I would have expected, and I say this in a positive, constructive way, that when the government sensed the NEET issue avalanching into something even more serious, and knowing fully well how the tendency of other political actors to politicize the issue and make an anti-government movement out of it has always been there. This tendency has always existed, from the farmers' protest to whatnot. Are you telling me that the government has not had enough experience with these protests to anticipate some of this? So there is that one issue. Second, as far as the Insta generation is concerned, it's not as if there are no pro-government voices on Insta, but there is only a point where you can hope, until which you can hope that that machinery will work without there being an active outreach by the government. And when influencers, or let's say self-appointed spokespersons who are not associated with the establishment, speak on certain aspects, and the government is staying mum on it, and I don't say that it must necessarily take a message from the top man himself. I'm not making that statement. Any spokesperson of the government who can engage actively with the media and the public could have done the job. Okay. I don't believe that there are people on Insta who actively condone this violence. There is a decent chance that it's motivated, and there's a decent chance that some are being misled. Okay. My point has been, some things have to be done and also seen to be done in order for
perception.
You to change.
You're right about that. And, and when you say about pro-government voices, it's not so much about being pro or anti-government. All that we should care is that, we should be pro-rule of law or pro-justice in the larger, sense of the word. Let me now get to the police action that we saw. Now, one opinion or one school of thought is that when there is a prohibitory orders, when there are curbs in place, then no matter who you are, you will have to follow that. The onus is on the police to maintain law and order. Right. Then there are others who say the police assaulted peaceful protesters. They were lathi charged. There are reports of pellet guns or, other such things being used. How do you see that?
I think in a rapidly spiraling situation, with the motivated protesters having a better sense of how to control the narrative and the government being caught slightly unprepared on the subject, I believe that unfortunately the narrative has spun out of control. And there is a possibility that there are multiple examples of excesses, and there is equally a possibility that there are equally important and equal number of examples where the police has been forced to respond, especially when protesters turned violent. Because at the end of the day, we must ask ourselves, what explains some of these videos where they're just jumping on policemen or dragging some of these RAF, security men, and the mob is practically lynching them? And what do you make of some of these protesters belonging to a particular community brandishing swords in public? What exactly is going on here? So I don't think it's going to be possible for us to give a clean sheet to either party here. And in a situation such as this, there may have been instances of excesses. But somewhere the students must also stop or ask some of these motivated parties from entering the fray, and they must distance. The good part is they're actively doing this. Several videos on Instagram have already come out asking people to be aware of these mischief mongers jumping into the fray to convert this into some kind of anti-government action. But as I said, you will get the parents on your side when you're seen as taking action. They will rein in their children. Then it becomes easier to identify the mischief mongers who are playing games here, using this as an opportunity to start some kind of a Gen Z movement on Nepal lines.
No, you're right. But you can only get the parents to act against, children if they are actually genuine students. Now, we've heard you said anti-government. This has gone well beyond that, Sai. I'm sure you've seen videos of, murderous rants against the Prime Minister. There are slogans against the Indian Army. What has the Indian Army got to do with this?
That only shows that this is nothing but an opportunity for a lot of lumpen elements and anti-India elements who have jumped into this. Suddenly you find all sorts of non-binary gender groups jumping into the fray as if this is some kind of a gender issue. Then you have the usual Bhim Army suspects jump into the fray as if this is another social justice issue, which is particularly limited to a particular group or community. Then you have the Nihangs jumping into the fray as if this is some kind of a persecution of a particular community. Then you have people jumping in, throwing slogans with respect to 370. That clearly shows every such instance is a cauldron, an opportunity for people to jump into the fray and make their presence felt and hope that they get something out of it. Can you expect any issue in this country to not be politicized regardless of who's in power? Not possible.
Not a problem. Yes.
Are you saying that if the shoe were in the other foot, politicization would not have happened? Then in which case we'll have to go back to the Anna Hazare movement as well.
Yes.
Something that was necessarily or seen as a movement against corruption ultimately became an anti-government movement because it was the government which was in power, the party that was in power then. So to hope that we will depoliticize all such movements and all such movements will be kept strictly academic, that's not going to happen in this country. So I would rather prepare for it and be ready with my ability to come out with facts, actively engage with the public, and also put out a list of measures that I have taken to address the situation at a larger level, than blame the audience for it or blame the mischief mongers for it, because one has an incentive to do what he is doing and the other is looking at what's happening. Okay, they're sitting on the fence hoping that some clarity will come through. The party in power and the dispensation must take the initiative to set the house in order and clear the air. I say this in a constructive way because I know for a fact that several ultra-loyalist defenders of the dispensation and the establishment do not like constructive feedback that is given, whether in private or in public.
I know what you're hinting at, but Sai, the larger question about, foreign hand narrative. Now, while one can't rule it out completely, but do you think this has become
I don't rule it out myself. I agree with you.
Yeah. But do you think, instead of saying that, this is a foreign hand conspiracy, etc., or motivated, the onus is also on government to ensure that they have, whatever it takes, all the agencies, the intel, infra, etc. Why do they allow a situation to, escalate to a point like this and then start saying these things or insinuating things?
After the farm protests and after Shaheen Bagh, one of the things that several commentators on the security front, and I am nobody to comment on that subject because I have no qualification to speak on, but drawing on what they said, they clearly said that the way of the future is mass mobilization as opposed to lone acts of terror. Okay? Where you're going to be looking at mob terror as opposed to instances where somebody is just exploding bombs or firing rockets. Okay? Because an amorphous group, especially if it has women and children as part of it, and there are students as part of it, the government's ability to deal with it is brought down significantly. Okay? As an establishment, considering the number of such protests of this template that we have seen over the last 12 years, what is the plan of action? What has been the government's response mechanism to deal with this situation from a PR perspective, from a legal perspective, and also from a ground perspective? That's something that you have to consider. Also, from the Ram Janambhoomi corruption to this, if you constantly blame a foreign hand for everything, and that seems to be the go-to defense, the omnibus defense of some of these ultra defenders sitting on social media, you're weaning away even those people who otherwise want you to do well, who are in support of the government on important issues.
And then you're also actually trivializing the genuine concerns or genuine threats.
Exactly. See, the very same people who are today criticizing the government, despite being the government's core vote base from the perspective of let's say, political choices, they have supported the revision of history on positive lines to bring out aspects which have been pixelated in all these decades. They've supported this. So when you're willing to take credit for that, why don't you take, let's say, the responsibility for this criticism that's coming your way, because it is in your interest. If this criticism was not in your interest, if somebody really wanted to watch you fall and fail and flounder, they would actually sit back, enjoy this entire masala, this entire drama with a popcorn and Coca-Cola in their hand, saying, let the government dig its own grave. But when actively voices are saying that please step up, please don't hope that this issue will die its own natural death. Don't think that the safety valve mechanism will work itself out. because you don't know how it could translate to something. Because when people take for granted, I recently saw a social media comment where someone says, a Nepal-like situation or a Bangladesh-like situation or a Sri Lanka-like situation will not happen in Bharat. Why not? Who said that? It's always possible.
All ingredients are there.
All ingredients are there. And with the active support of people from outside and collaborators from within, it's always possible. So I would operate on the principle of vigilance. And I will not say just because we happen to be a huge country, I will take it for granted. We are an extremely vulnerable country with 1,000 divisions that are being sown, that are constantly fomented. With active support from the outside, I would be extra vigilant compared to Nepal, Bangladesh, or Sri Lanka, because I'm a huge country, I'm a huge player, and therefore my failure matters to a lot of vested interests. I will take it even more seriously.
What will it take for this to end? Sai, do you think it is the foremost demand of the minister's resignation, or even that will not give us a closure?
Frankly speaking, you give a slice to the wolf, you know what happens next. Okay. But if the genuine segment of the population feels that this has become an ego battle for the government, and that there is some kind of hubris that is the reason behind failure of an active outreach, then they might tend to agree with the protesters, which shouldn't happen. Okay. I am not going to comment on whether someone should resign or not, because I would believe that you fix the problem. Does resignation fix the problem? If the answer is a yes, fine. But if it doesn't, then fix the problem. And importantly, taking accountability does not need to translate always to resignation. But what is certainly alarming and what is certainly bothering a lot of people is that you shouldn't have one-way interviews on these subjects. Come out and speak to the public. If you're so sure of your position and you believe that you've taken the measures necessary to address
Right.
this,
Be receptive to feedback,
be receptive
engage,
to feedback and engage.
have dialogue. Yeah. Finally,
Let me put it this way.
yes.
One point.
Yeah.
If some people get to vent their anger at the person in question or at the establishment in a press conference, that may actually be a better thing to do.
True.
Give them an opportunity, vent their anger there so that you're in a position to take it.
And you're
You have
also
to
in a position then to counter it, with whatever
Correct.
you have on your mind. Now, finally, Sai, I want to ask you this about, without taking the name of the individual, obviously, like you said, any protest or any issue is bound to get politicized in a country like ours. There have been people who said there will come a time when the youth of this country will go to the Prime Minister's house, dande marenge Pradhan Mantri ko. Do you think, irresponsible commentary like this actually adds fuel to the fire?
It's not just irresponsible commentary, it is also something that is indicative of the massive percolation of trashy content through certain channels where youngsters are consuming stuff and they start believing in all sorts of things, and they don't realize that their own careers, their own lives are in jeopardy when they start saying these things. Because the five-star activists and actors from Bollywood who have used words such as Jahil for the Prime Minister, they will get away with it because they will lose nothing. The lyricist couple will lose nothing because their careers are already set, they've already lived their lives. The students will pay the price.
Right.
So before you push students and you tell them, "Hum aapke saath hai aur aap aage badhiye," what exactly are you asking them? And if you're so concerned about it, why don't you get on the streets and you also ensure that you show them how to conduct a democratic protest, a civilized protest, and also air their issue? Instead, you're encouraging anarchy. That means, as opposed to making the issue the center of the discussion, you have chosen to vent your political grievances by firing from the shoulders of these students.